Cambridge, Massachusetts, for another in what is a series of online international conferences that the Boston Global Forum has been conducting over the past 3 years. The Boston Global Forum was created to see if we could take advantage of a lot of the learning and experience and wisdom of people here in the Boston area and focus every year on an important international issue. We began on the subject of occupational safety and health standards after the disasters in Bangladesh. And I'd like to think that we contributed to the dialogue, which has significantly improved that situation. And then we turn to the very difficult and very important question of how to create a framework for peace and security in the Pacific. And that has been our subject for the past several months. And today, we're going to try to conclude that discussion, although obviously our interest in this will be ongoing, because the situation in the Pacific continues to be difficult. I don't think we've quite achieved the kind of international consensus that we hope we would achieve. So this is going to be a continuing effort. But today we're going to try to see if we can sum up our discussion over the course of the past several months and see if we can at least establish a plan, set of principles that might govern relationships in that part of the world. And then we're going to go on to our topic for the coming year, which will be the whole issue of cyber warfare and what we do about it, before we end up with another Cold War, only this time on another aspect of international conflict. For whatever reason, the world seems to be able to produce lots and lots of issues that we can deal with. And there never seemed to be a lack of them. But it's been wonderfully rewarding, I must say, for myself, and I think for my colleagues who were deeply involved in this, and especially for Tuan Nguyen, who was the creator of this, to get the kind of response we've gotten and the interest in seeing if we can't do some problem solving. And so this afternoon, for the next couple of hours, we're going to see if we can wrap up our discussion on the question of the framework for peace and security in the Pacific, with the help of some very, very good people, and at least set the stage for what we hope will be some serious action on the international front in a collaborative way to deal with this problem and minimize the conflict and maximize the kind of collaboration that we want to have. So with that, we're going to begin with David Sanger, the chief Washington correspondent of the New York Times, who spends a little bit of his time up here in Cambridge at the Belfer Center, and ask him to kick things off, and then we're going to have ourselves a good lively discussion for the next couple of hours. David?
Thank you very much, Governor. It's great to be back here at the Global Forum. It's a terrific series and always enjoyed our discussions here. I thought that maybe the thing I could do that would be most useful at the beginning here, since I come to this more as a reporter than a true academic studying these issues in the South China Sea, though we try to take them up in a Harvard course at Graham Allison and I teach, is to talk a little bit about the events that led up to the summit meeting between President Obama and President Xi just 2.5 weeks ago, and how this issue played there, where it factored into the meeting, and where we think it's headed. So, as President Xi was preparing for this meeting and President Obama was trying to set the agenda for it, it was clear that there were some areas where they would be able to announce some significant progress. Climate change was the one that was the easiest because it required the Chinese merely to re-announce some things that they were already planning to go do anyway. That the hardest issue was going to be cyber. The next topic that is Governor Dukakis said we'll be taking up here. and that the one on which they were likely to make the least progress was the South China Sea issue. And that's essentially how it worked out. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But the subtext of the entire discussion between President Obama and President Xi was to try to figure out whether or not Mr. Xi himself would be in a position to actually make many compromises, and whether they could get a better read on the question of why they had misunderstood when President Xi first came to power 2 years ago, how aggressive he would be on these territorial issues. Remember, when President Xi took over, he had come to the United States just a few months before, taken a tour with Vice President Biden, went back to the house in Iowa where he had visited as a young party official, said all the right things. And many in the Obama White House thought that he was going to pursue the line that Hu Jintao's state counselor, Bdmv, had written about at the end of President Hu's time, which was basically an essay that said, don't challenge the United States right now or any other major power. Focus on the domestic economy, consolidate your power, but follow what Deng Xiaoping would tell us to do, which was basically bide our time. The moment will come to deal with all these issues. And most of the intelligence reports that were floating around to the White House, the State Department, the Defense Department, strongly seemed to suggest that the United States thought Xi would do exactly that. And they had it wrong. They got right the Xi Jinping that wanted to go deal with corruption, with consolidating his power. They got wrong the risk-taker side of Xi. And so what did we see happen? We saw a huge rise in the cyber attacks, which were going on anyway at this time. And then we also saw a significant rise in the activity in the South China Sea, including the building of the islands that you have the pictures there for. They're not really islands, I guess I would say, building military facilities on half-submerged reefs. The president decided to try to deal with cyber first, and that didn't go anywhere at his first meetings with President Xi, which were at Sunnylands. And in the area of the territorial challenges, the first thing that the president had to go face was the declaration of the air defense identification zone that the Chinese had declared over a very broad area. And the U.S. response to that was to immediately send some B-52s right through the middle of the zone in order to make the point that the U.S. didn't recognize this. But with the islands, they've been much more cautious. There have been a number of naval activities around this new construction, but nothing that went inside the 12-mile limit that the Chinese declared, because the Chinese, of course, are playing the game of saying that this is truly their territory, and therefore they've got 12 miles around it. The Navy and the new head of PACOM, Admiral Harry Harris, pressed very hard internally to send one of those missions within 12 miles prior to the Xi visit. And this was rejected by the White House for fear that it would poison the atmosphere of the visit and force the Chinese to take some kind of harder line than they thought was necessary. All of the indications we have now is that that mission to go inside the 12-mile area or within 12 miles of these reefs is likely to happen in the next few weeks, now that the visit is over. That Admiral Harris won his point, he just didn't win his timing. Now, the bigger question is the one that Bob Gates used to put so wonderfully whenever some kind of major project was proposed for the military, where he used to say that the three words least asked in Washington are, and then what? And the interesting question for the Navy right now, as they get ready to go inside these limits, is the "and then what" question. Because it's not at all clear to us at this point how the Chinese are going to respond. The betting is that the Chinese will harass and follow these ships, but won't do anything that is overtly hostile. But it is a big game of chicken, because the Chinese have looked at President Obama and calculated, quite rightly, that we're not going to risk a military conflict for a group of reefs that until 2 years ago were largely of interest for fishing purposes. And they've got that right. If you look across the range of the activities that President Obama has engaged in or not, he has very much followed the light footprint strategy. That is to say, he's willing to use cyber assets, he's willing to go use drones, he's willing to arm rebels occasionally and train allies, whether they are the Iraqis or others, but he's not willing to go be in a position that's going to risk a significant conflict. In this particular case, I think they're calculating that Xi isn't willing to risk it either. I mean, Xi has got other problems right now. And what made this summit particularly fascinating was the first one in years, you might argue 2 decades, in which a Chinese leader showed up in Washington in a position of weakness rather than one of strength, largely out of the economic downturn, which has led us to question whether or not the length and degree of support that Xi Jinping has is as great as we initially were saying, or even were saying 6 months ago when people were making the case that he's the strongest Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping. So that's the situation that we are headed into now. I think the president wants very much to make the point that we do not recognize this territory as Chinese territory. At the press conference with President Xi, he went out of his way to say the United States will fully respect international law on these issues and expects the Chinese to as well. And that was interpreted by the Chinese as a sign that he would, in fact, start the mission up that they're going to head into. I think the bigger question is, can you keep this issue from becoming a very big one in the relationship? And can you persuade the Chinese that most of what they're doing right now is taking the other regional players and driving them right into the American camp? And the American argument is that's just what happens. This is happening now. The Filipinos are talking about reopening a version of Clark Air Base. To do that, they're going to have to throw FedEx out of Clark Air Base. Good luck with that. The Vietnamese have been suddenly very interested in talks with the United States. And here we had the remarkable sight just a few months ago of a leader of the Vietnamese Communist Party sitting in the Oval Office having a nice chat and a cup of coffee with the President of the United States. For anybody in the room old enough to remember Vietnam, that is a pretty mind-bending concept. So I think over the next year or two, the United States sees a moment, not necessarily of the upper hand, but certainly of some leverage here. And that's something probably worth our exploring. I think I've probably gone longer than I promised the governor I would, so I will leave it at that, but I hope this gives you a little bit of a snapshot of where we are today.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Bill, can you hear me? Can you unmute your microphone, sir? Yes,
Okay. I'm ready to speak. Have you got the presentation?
you can actually play the presentation on your desktop and share it on Google.
You want to take that risk? Okay, we'll give it a go.
All right. This
Let
is,
Governor speak first.
I think this is Bill Hayden from London. Twan, is that correct? Okay.
That's good.
Come on in, Bill, and talk to us.
Hi there. Thank you very much, Governor. Thank you very much to Ong Kwan for the invitation. I'm on a possibly ropey internet connection, so let's hope the force is with us. I will attempt to just launch a PowerPoint presentation. I thought it might be played from there, but if you want to play it from here, then I'll do it from here.
Mình chỉ có
So, yeah, can you see that?
Okay, let me show the PowerPoint for you on here. Okay, you just speak and then
I think it'll be a bit easier. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, so people have spoken about what China has been doing in the South China Sea recently in the last 2 years as a fait accompli. So my question is, what has China accomplished in the last 2 years? And I think the significance of China's island building lies less in what it has done so far than what it might be about to do. I think it's worth remembering that even though China has been dredging and building since September 2013, it hasn't occupied any new territory. 6 of the 7 recently built islands lie on reefs that China settled in 1988, and the 7th Mischief Reef was occupied in 1994. So the question is, what will China do next? Do we have the slides up? Let's just check. Hello?
Yes, the slides up. The slides up. Yes, the slides.
Yeah, do we have the one that says current concerns?
Which page are you at now?
Current concerns.
Current concern. Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yes. So in my view, concern should focus on 3 areas of sea: the Vanguard Bank off the Vietnamese coast, the Reed Bank or Recto Bank off the Philippines coast, and around the Luconia Shoals and the James Shoal off the Malaysian coast. All 3 have significant oil and gas potential. That's not to say that hydrocarbons are the sole reason for China's island building. There are many motivations reflecting China's many security interests and its many internal lobbies. Next slide, please. Back in April, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson provided a list of these motivations. It was a long list, perhaps to camouflage the most important items: territorial defence, including the assertion of sovereignty for its own sake, and maritime rights, the harvesting of mineral resources and fish around the islands. In contrast to those such as, for example, the